Welcome to the Freelance Tribe. Here we talk with skilled freelancers about their professional journey. Stay tuned for real-life experiences to learn and actionable steps to take to improve your freelancing career. My name is Yuri. I'm a community builder at Code Control and 9am.works, and my guest is Chauntelle Lewis, an independent consultant and strategist with over 9 years of in-house and agency experience across graphic design, DEI, and social media marketing. Committed to creating more accountability, inclusion, accessibility, and equitable representation in tech. And today we'll discuss what rights freelancers have and how to advocate for them. So welcome, Chauntelle.
Hi, thanks. To be fair, it's so funny when I hear, well, one, how long I've worked in the industry for, and then two, like what I do, and I'm like, oh, is that me? So it's always great to hear it.
It's you. It's all about you. Yes. And finally, we are having this conversation. We'll doing like some back and forth here and there, but it's all about the serendipity of life. And finally, let's start with the first question. So I feel it sometimes myself, and I bet you definitely felt it yourself. So tell me, how do you think freelancers are excluded from the workforce benefits that full-time employees have?
Yes, I guess, to dive right in, I often think, I guess the kind of most basic level is that you don't get the same rights as your counterparts do that are employed full time. So, for example, I mean, in the UK, it's a bit of a caveat, and I'll throw the caveat after. But generally, if you are like on a freelancer contract, the idea is that you should, and I say should because it doesn't always work that way. You should be kind of treated like as an independent. With that said, that you don't get a pension. Like you might be included in certain things, but like often the basic things like dental care or pension, it's like you're excluded. There's a few caveats in the UK where a lot of companies have like a freelance structure, but it's more like a contractor structure. So you do technically get a few things that employees do get as benefits, but it's a bit of nuance because you have to focus on more on kind of doing your own tax return. So it gets a bit messy, but yeah, I've had experience before where I was like a freelancer, but on paper I was kind of like an employee.
Hmm.
So I had like initially like an internship contract that kind of went down more the lines of like I do it in my own. How was it actually? No, so like like they did our taxes for us, but it was like a kind of freelance. It was confusing, but HMRC was like very specific. I got to speak to quite a lot, and then when I became a full time employee, it shifted, but I had to kind of like do my taxes a little bit as well. So it was just a bit messy. But then there are some experiences where in the UK, for example, like the holidays, that can be quite messy because generally as a freelancer, you should be able to dictate when you're having your holiday. But when you're kind of in house, it gets a bit more tricky because you kind of have to rely more on like the structure of that company. So I think it's just creating like more separation in terms of like what's a freelancer, what's an employee, and then how does the kind of contractor structure kind of blur the lines a little bit and just being clear like what you're entitled to. Hope that answers your question.
It's so fun because I usually think about freelancers that they are doing a lot of stuff. They are kind of entrepreneurs. They're running their own small businesses, are paying taxes. Like they're doing everything that, and even more. Like for sure, if you're a full-time employee, the company does all those things for you, but you are doing it themselves. And I'm like, why don't you have like a pension? Why don't you have this insurance? Why don't you have anything? It's like so unfair. And yeah, I feel like there are some movements already that are advocating for freelancers. Do you know about any of those movements?
Ooh, to be fair, in the UK, like to put my head, I can't think of any. But I feel like because I was part of the marketing, so before a certain person took over Twitter, to call it X, there was a big like marketing freelancer, but just kind of like freelancer kind of community, but mainly like US focused. So I guess like that was somewhere where I would always go to get support and like people advocating. There is I forgot the name of it, but there is someone in the company in the UK, where they focus a lot on like support people that have been paid late. I wish I knew the name of it, but if I find it, I'll definitely send it for the notes. But what they do is like, often, unfortunately, people, companies don't pay freelancers on time. And so they will literally chase that company and try to get the person paid. So I think in that way, like those companies are kind of advocating for freelancers, but there's no kind of from top of my mind, anyone that's like, I don't know, that I go to personally for like freelance support, but I'm sure there's people out there that support freelancers.
I feel like it's something that we are trying to build with Freelance Unlocked conference and all this movement around freelancers, to make it like more a little, not just a conference, not just a community, but like a powerful force behind freelancers to like really go for these rights. And since you were both like a freelancer and employee, and even like you were being kind of employed, but still was a freelancer, I wonder what are the main differences between how companies treat freelancers and full-time employees?
Yeah, I guess like it goes back to kind of why they're hiring you in the first place. So I guess I've got a good kind of comparison because I've worked in the UK, but I've also had like US based clients. And I think like in the UK in particular, we have a very kind of like embedded in-house kind of structure for freelancers, which I definitely kind of like now having more experience, I definitely push away from. So in a way, they kind of treat you like an employee, and you're like, no, I'm not an employee. But there are other cases where it's like you are paid for a set project. So I've had experience before where it's like they've got a set project, maybe it's like a proposal. You have like maybe like 2.5 days that you're contracted for, and you do your project and then you leave. Other companies they kind of need more in house, so it's kind of like your set kind of client. So I've had experiences where I've had like a contract for like over a year, so, I come in and I do my workshops, then I come off. So I think it's just creating those boundaries where it's like, I'm not an employee, so I'm not always going to be on call. I have my set hours, and if it's admin, then you do admin, but just kind of set those foundations, being like, okay, like I'm not an employee, so you haven't got my time full time. But I'm a freelancer, so I need to set my boundaries so I can have other clients too. But then there's other cases as well, like where I've had US clients where, once again, like a bit similar, where it's like I have more than one client, but I'm kind of part of the team, so to speak. So like you might have a manager position in that team. So I think still once again it's like knowing how many hours you have with them, setting boundaries with terms of your expectations, especially when it's like different time zones, like knowing when people can maybe send you a Slack message versus email, communicating like just your style of working is really helpful. So I think the difference between freelancing and employed, like being an employee, is just that sometimes you can set more boundaries as a freelancer, because it's kind of in the kind of yeah, it's just kind of like what your job is really. Is like people are kind of aware that you have more freedom. Yeah.
And sometimes it just doesn't feel right to do this. Sometimes you feel like, oh, it's my client, they're paying me money. How can I send boundaries? And sometimes clients are using that. They're sending you emails all the time, they're inviting you to calls, they're wasting your time. So, how to correctly set these boundaries in a way that you are like, hey, I'm freelancer, I'm here for a project, I'm not here for all the not important meetings, but also do it in this right way that clients like, oh, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much for saying that. So, in a polite way, how to set boundaries in a polite way.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely say like at the start, like foundation setting. So a really good kind of freelance structure would be you have maybe like your what do you call it now? Oh my gosh, my brain's gone blank. But like you have your intro call, and then you find out what they want, and then as you're going to get into like what you're going to do, you have your scope of work, but also in your agreement or your contract, that's where you set the foundation and boundaries and be like, okay, like you get X amount of emails per month, you get X amount of calls per month. I will join in-house meetings. X, you know what I mean? It sounds very tedious, but just set that foundation. And I had a really good clause that my friend sent me. She was like, being more aware that mental health is a
Mhm.
thing and that awareness. So I've got a clause that kind of says like, if I ever need to have like a mental health day, I'm entitled to it, and that's in my contract. So, if I experience burnout, of course, like I'll work
Hmm.
within the guidance of what you have, but also like I'm a person at the end of the day, so I need those boundaries in that setting. And I think another thing as well is just being you can also adapt it and tweak it. So even in a contract saying, like mindful that, we're kind of setting these foundations and this boundaries here now, but open to discussion and negotiation later down the line if we need to increase hours. But I think it's just a communication and getting in writing, because I think the best thing to do is avoid the kind of like he said, she said, and also just avoid confusion. So having things written down, signed off, it just helps everyone.
So, am I hearing it correctly that one of the best ways is to really set it in the contract?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Got
so, I
it.
mean, yeah, sometimes it doesn't have to be a contract, it can be agreement. For smaller projects, you can just do an agreement. So it's like, so and so is expected to do this many hours, and these are the deliverables. Like kind of like it's kind of like your work of scope, your work of scope. But yeah, just yeah, write it down.
Got it. And except for boundaries, what other rights do freelancers have but usually forget or even don't know about?
Oh, that's a good one. I would because now I'm like, oh my gosh, what rights are there? And I don't know about. I do not know. I was get that question because I have no idea.
I feel like boundaries is just enough. You know,
Yeah.
like if you are doing it correctly, if you really think good about like what do you really want, how do you really work, and I feel like it also includes a lot of personal thoughts. You know, I feel like people who are freelancing, they have to know, like, be the best friend for yourself and kind
Mhm.
of like know yourself from the best side. And I feel like it's also include a lot of thought works. So you have to really sit, you have to understand like what is the best way that I'm doing my work, what is the best time that I'm the most productive, like how what is the best way of communicating. You know, I really like this when people are creating instruction on how to work with me. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, because I think it's great because like obviously you think about kind of neurodiversity and just like even people that have that are disabled, for example, like I have a speech impairment, so I always say to people, if you want an interview with me, for example, like like I said to you, like send me the questions in advance. I can look through them just to give me that confidence. When I used to be a public speaker slash like workshop facilitator, I would always try to prep a lot in advance, and then have a caveat at the beginning of when I speak to people saying, "Oh, this is how I like to work," or "This is how I communicate." Just kind of helps you feel more at ease, and so I use that same approach for freelancing too, when it's like working for clients saying, this is how I like to work. If you need me, like if you want to communicate with me, please send an email. I'll see it quicker than you trying to call me. Because my memory is not great. So best for me to like have an email, I can see it better, and then we can go on a call, but I'll take lots of notes. So it's just like transparency and communication is very important. But yeah.
You know, I also feel like when freelancers are setting like really, really good boundaries, sometimes it may sound too much from the client side. And they're like, oh, okay, I have so many requirements. Maybe I will just go to another freelancer who work for the
Mhm.
same rate, but doesn't have as many requirements. So how to keep this balance between like having good boundaries and understanding that you are doing good work for yourself, but also not repelling your potential clients?
Yeah, I mean, can I give a really blunt answer? In a way, I would say, oh, it's gonna sound really bad, but set your boundaries. And I say it because I think who's for you would always be for you. And so I know, like at the beginning, so I freelanced when I first came out of university. So very different experience to being a bit more mature in my career. So I think we start out first. Definitely, there's that level of kind of having to please the client. Absolutely understand, very valid. But I think as you get more mature in your career, there's a essence of like you remembering that you are the expert, and so you have to be very firm in saying actually like if the client's already pushing back at this early stage, what will they be like when you finally do have them as a client? And I think those are always the early kind of red or green flags. So personally, I would set those boundaries, and sometimes it's gonna be have to be like on the client end being like a no, and that's fine. But once again, I think base it on your own circumstances. So if you have a lot of clients at a time, and you can afford to lose one client, that's
Mhm.
fine. But if you're like really dependent on this new client, then you have to kind of bite your tongue a little bit. But once again, like safeguard yourself in your contract. So, you can always come back to the contract saying, okay, like, for example, like I used to be a graphic designer. And so you set like a boundary where it's like, you get this many edits for this photo. I know, for example, like a lot of photographers do that as well. So you get as many amount of edits for this photo. If you want more, then this is the price for edits that are extra. So that's kind of way that you safeguard yourself without being too rude. But in general, if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. So I think just knowing like when you want to pick your battles versus when you don't want to, because I think that kind of like back and forth can be very draining, and not everyone has the bandwidth to do so. So yeah, you have to kind of just know like what are you willing to cope with. And me personally, I think I've been in the industry for too long where I've had like really, really good clients that just really align me so well that I use that as my standard of being like, it doesn't have to be difficult. So yeah, I think that's probably a bit lucky to say that. But yeah, I'm big on set boundaries, and if people leave, they leave, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I feel like is that sometimes it's better to say no in the
Mm.
beginning than, it will save you a lot of nerves in the future. Either and the fun thing, so I had so many conversations with freelancers, and like many of them tell like do not act out of desperation, because the
Yeah.
moment you act out of desperation, first of all, clients can feel that, and many of them take advantage of that, and it's not a good. And all the time that freelancers were searching for projects out of desperation, it was not a great experience for them. So it's
Yeah.
something to be really aware of. And coming back to this support and difference of freelancers and full-time employees, so what do you think you personally has to be done on a governmental level to support
Mm.
freelancers more?
Oh my gosh, how long do I have? So many things, so many things. So I think I'll start with like payments. Let's start with payments. Um, Freelancers pay a lot of tax, and I think because of that, there needs to be a bit more support in terms of like just the education around. So, for example, like every year we do tax return, and if you're a sole trader, it's very different to if you're a limited company. And a lot of the, I guess, like me even knowing how to do tax was very kind of trial and error. And so, for example, like just education around like where do you like like maybe a list of really legit sorry, oh my gosh, what do you call it? Oh my gosh, my brain went blank. Yeah, so I guess that maybe like a list of like accountants that people can go to support them.
Hmm.
Um, or maybe there's like check-ins. I mean, there's definitely companies that do these things. Like I know, for example, like Hatch has a lot of support for entrepreneurs, but often freelancers don't treat themselves as entrepreneurs, and so because of that, there's that kind of gap in knowledge. Um, I think the thing that I did very well is like when I first was a freelancer after out of uni, it was very kind of trial and error. When I came back to be a freelancer after working for a few years in the industry, I was like, I'm going to do things a bit differently. So got
Hmm.
my accountant first. Spoke to a lot of people that were freelancers, so like that helps. I think from a government level, there could be more support in terms of like collecting more freelancers together and creating a fund where they can support each other or be supported. Because when there's like a recession or there's layoffs in any industry, we feel it the first because people tend to not want to outsource from freelancers. So is there like a kind of emergency fund? And I also think about back to the pandemic. Um, a lot of freelancers struggled because, for example, like being in the creative scene, a lot of people were getting furloughed from the employees, but as a freelancer, a lot of people couldn't even freelance anymore because there was no support from the government for that. It's like
Yeah.
how do you support freelancers if they weren't if they didn't have like an employer? So I think just that thinking about freelancers when policies are made. So like yeah, for example, like if there's a crisis, a big global crisis again, what happens to freelancers, not just employees? What's the support for them? And then I think it's more like when it comes to like I think it's more just the education part really. It's like we get penalized quite a lot for certain things. So
Yeah.
you know hoping about like tax. Tax I think tax is the biggest one.
Yeah,
But
yeah, totally. And I feel like the one that gives you the most problems, because if you are not doing it correctly, you'll have to pay a lot of money afterward. And it's interesting because I totally hear the need of education, and I also think that it always has to be two ways. Has to
yeah.
be one way, like here's an instruction, you can do it yourself, and yeah, if you do it yourself, it's your responsibility, whatever. And here is a list of uh, tax accountants or like experts who know what they do, who do it like every day. So you can go pay them money, and they will do everything for you. So but sometimes it's like neither. So you don't have any instructions, you don't have a list of people, and you have to discover everything on your own as a freelancer. And I feel like it's really can be made so much easier, and something that we are trying to do in this 9 a.m. community for freelancers, kind of like given the tools and then like, yeah, you can do it yourself. And I totally support what you are talking about. And Chantelle, I wish to have the sky as the limit, but time is the limit. So the final question, what is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh, wow. So every time I have a takeaway, I always say that I'm going to be experimental, but every single time I get Chinese takeaway, and it's always, always, always going to be like a egg fried rice with sweet and sour chili, Hong Kong style. I mean, I'm always trying to change it, but it's just if it's not broken, don't fix it. So it's my favorite.
Got it. And what is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so definitely through LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. So it's Chauntelle Lewis on LinkedIn, and then Twitter it'd be CJN Lewis underscore.
Mhm.
Instagram as well, CJ Lewis underscore. And then through my venture, it would be like the Bethel Planter. So on the website, like www.thebethelplanter.com. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much, Chauntelle, for sharing your experience. And it's been such a pleasure to hear and learn from you.
Thank you, Yuri. It was great to talk to you.
And thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, hit the like button, 5 stars, and share it with your friend. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.